Welcome to this presentation. Today we are going to discuss about HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is a protocol used mainly to access data on the World Wide Web. HTTP functions as a combination of FTP and SMTP. It is similar to FTP because it transfers files and uses the services of TCP. However, it is much simpler than FTP because it uses only one TCP connection. There is no separate control connection, only the data are transferred between the client and server. HTTP is like SMTP because the data transferred between the client and the server look like SMTP messages. So in addition, the format of the messages is controlled by MIME like headers. Unlike SMTP, the HTTP messages are not destined to be read by the humans. They are read and interpreted by the HTTP server and HTTP client. So SMTP messages are stored and forwarded, but HTTP messages are delivered immediately. The commands from the client and to the server are embedded in a request message. The contents of the requested file or other information are embedded in a response message. HTTP uses the services of TCP on well-known port 80. And now let's see the HTTP transaction between client and server. Although HTTP uses the services of TCP, HTTP itself is a stateless protocol. The client initializes the transaction by sending a request message. The server replies by sending a response. The formats of the request and response messages are similar. A request message contains a request line, header, and sometimes a body. A response message consists of status line, header, and sometimes a body. The first line in the request message is called request line. The first line in the response message is called status line. There is one common field, that is URL or a status code. And the HTTP is used to define the client-server program can be written to retrieve the web pages from the web. The HTTP client sends a request. The HTTP server returns a response. The server uses the port number as I said earlier, and the client uses the temporary port number. HTTP uses the services of TCP, which is a connection-oriented and reliable protocol. This means that before any transaction between the client and the server can take place, a connection needs to be established between them. So after the transaction, the connection should be terminated. The client and server, however, do not need to worry about errors in messages exchanged or loss of any message because TCP is reliable and take care of this matter. The request type field is used in the request message. In 1.1 version of HTTP, several request types are defined. And the request types is categorized into methods like GET means get means request a document from the server. Head means request information about a document but not the document itself. Post means sends in some information from the client to server. Put means send a document from the server to the client. Trace means it echoes the incoming request. Connects means reserved, and option means inquires about available option. And status code field is used in the response message. The status code field is similar to those in the FTP and SMTP protocols. It consists of 3 digits, whereas the codes 100 range are only informational. The code in the 200 range indicate a successful request. The codes in the 300 range redirect the client to the another URL. And the codes in 400 range indicate an error at the client side. Finally, the codes in the 500 range indicate an error at the server side. And the status phrase field is used in the response message. It explains the status code in text form. For example, 100 means continue. The initial part of the request has been received and the client may continue with its request. And 101 is switching. The server is complying with the client request to switch protocols defined in the upgrade header. And 200 is okay, the request is successful. 201 is created, a new URL is created, and 202 is accepted. The request is accepted, but it is not immediately acted upon. 204 is no content, and there is no content in the body. And 301 is moved permanently. The requested URL is no longer used by the server. 302 is moved temporarily. The requested URL has moved temporarily. 304 is not modified. The document has not been modified. 400 is bad request. There is a syntax error in the request, and 401 is unauthorized. The request lacks proper authorization, and 403 is forbidden. Service is denied, and 404 is not found. The document is not found. 405 is method not allowed. The method is not supported in this URL. 406 is not acceptable. The format requested is not acceptable. 500 is internal server error. There is an error such as crash at the server side. And 501 is not implemented. The action requested cannot be performed, and 503 is service unavailable, and the service is temporarily unavailable but may be requested in the future. Now let's see the difference between non-persistence versus persistence connections. The hypertext concept embedded in web page documents may require several requests and responses. If the web page's objects to be retrieved are located on different servers, then a new TCP connections for retrieving each object must be created. However, if some of the objects are located on the same server, we have two choices. One is we can retrieve each object using new TCP connection, or we can make a TCP connection and retrieve them all. So the first method is called a non-persistent connection, and the second method is called persistent connection. In a non-persistent connection, one TCP connection is made for each request or response. First, the client opens the TCP connection and sends a request. The server sends the response and closes the connection. The client reads the data until it encounters an end of file marker. It then closes the connection. So in this strategy, if a file contains link to n different pictures in different files, all located on the same server, the connection must be opened and closed n+1 times. And the non-persistent strategy imposes high overhead on the server because the server needs n+1 different buffers each time a connection opened. Now let's see an example of non-persistent connection. The client needs to access a file that contains one link to an image. The text file and image are located on the same server. So here the header exchanges the additional information between the client and the server. For example, the client can request that the document to be sent in a special format, or the server can send extra information about the document. The header can consist of one or more header lines, and each header line has a header name, a colon, a space, a header value. And we'll show how some header lines in the examples header lines belongs to one of the four categories. One is general header, request header, response header, and entity header. A request message can contain only general, request, and entity headers. A response message, on the other hand, can contain only general, response, and entity header. The general header gives general information about the message and can be present in both a request and a response. Now let's see some of the general header with the description. Catch control is a header which specifies the information about catching. Connection shows the whether the connection should be closed or not. Date shows the current date, and MIME version shows the MIME version used, and upgrade specifies the preferred communication protocol. And the request header can be present only in a request message. It specifies the client configuration and client preferred document format. Accept means it shows the medium format the client can accept, and accept chart shows the character set of the client can handle. Accept encoding shows the encoding scheme the client can handle. Accept language shows the language the client can accept, and authorization shows what permissions the client has. From shows the email address of the user. Host shows the host and port number of the server. And if modified since sends the document if newer than specified date. And if match header shows the sends the document only if it matches with the given tag. If non-match header sends the document only if it doesn't match given tag. If range header sends only the portion of the document that is missing. If unmodified since sends the document if not changed since specified date. And referrer header specifies the URL of the linked document, and user agent identifies the client program. And response header can be present only in response message. It specifies the server configuration and special information about the request. We can see a list of some of the response headers with their descriptions. Accept range headers shows if server accepts the range requested by client. Age header shows the age of the document. Public header shows the supported list of methods. Read after header specifies the date after which the server is available. Server header shows the server name and version number. Thank you.